Hi everyone, this is Mrs. Surette. I apologize. I was making a recording of two different classes actually, and in both cases the recording software decided to die on me. So I'm going to make a recording of me going through the presentation, which I'm really sad about because the discussion today was phenomenal on all of my friends' parts. So I really enjoyed today's class, and I'm sorry for anyone who missed it. I hope you can join us in the future because we had just great discussion and great points today. So the first question I asked was, how do you know when you're right? Sometimes we're in a situation where we're not 100% sure if what we're doing is the right thing to do, and we have to figure out how we know when we're right. And so that was one of the things we started with, and we had a lot of different answers across my classes, some really cool things. A lot of people talked about a gut instinct, kind of just knowing the right direction to go. Some people talked about whether or not you feel guilty afterwards, or if you feel relieved after you do it. Another person was mentioning that sometimes you don't want to hurt people, and the litmus test is whether or not you're hurting someone if you can avoid it at all possibly. Of course, then again, sometimes you do have to hurt someone, like, you know, if someone asks you out and you want to turn them down, and their response was to do it as kindly as possible. Others talked about honesty. If what you're doing is honest and fair, then it would be the right thing. So there were lots of really cool ideas of what you can do, how you know when you're right. But we kind of agreed this is a tricky subject. You know, it's not like there's clear cut. Sometimes you've got to do some guessing. So I asked my friends, what does the term ethics mean to you? And we came up with a lot of terms: morals, values, what you believe in, what you've grown up knowing, honesty, fairness, and even kindness. All of these came up as terms that could be used for ethics. The way you treat other people, being respectful, these all came up as well. And the definition of ethics is quite simply the rules of conduct or moral principles that people follow. But the thing about ethics is we can all sort of follow different rules or different moral principles, and that's where things get murky. How do we know what's ethical? So I asked people to talk about some things they consider to be ethical, and I got a lot of answers. Some people said if you're doing the right thing even when no one's around. I talked about being respectful of others, holding the door for someone who needs help, taking care of others in your community. These things all came up. Also, being honest and open with someone came up. And we really got into some good discussions of what makes something ethical. You know, at what point do you struggle a little bit with your answer because you've got to come up with an idea of what is the right thing to do. We also talked about how talking about ethics is not a trap. You don't always agree on what ethics are, but you can learn about and respect the ethics of others. And even if you can't accept or respect it, you can at least treat the person with respect. So that's kind of what we got into. And so I told the students about the group that actually regulates the code of conduct and ethical treatment of people in the experimentation process. Since we don't all agree on it, we sort of need a governing body that looks into situations and then decides, is this experiment ethical? Can it be performed? And in general, that is the American Psychological Association. However, for colleges, there is in particular the Institutional Review Board. And that is because colleges tend to conduct more tests, but also because, you know, sometimes students don't have a full grasp of all of the rules, or maybe they're pushing the rules a little bit. And so their job is to specifically look at anything that involves experimentation at the college level, like college-run experiments and stuff. There are two questions. So if you're going to do some research, you need to consider these two questions. The first one is, should the study even be done at all? What are the risks and what are the benefits? And do the benefits outweigh the risks? Sometimes when people come up with a study, it could, and by the way, you can insert the word experiment, survey, any of those there. Sometimes it can be a little risky. If you're testing a new medication, for example, there's a risk that the person could get sick, or they could get a different illness, or they could even die. But you want to look at that versus the benefits. If the benefit shows that there's a really good chance that this could really help a lot of people, it might be worth the risk of doing. Of course, on the other hand, if it's nothing but risk and very little benefit, well, then you shouldn't do that experiment. The other part is adequate informed consent. How much do you need to tell your participants to make sure that they are informed enough? Because sometimes if you tell them every single part of the experiment, they're not going to react in a natural way, and so you might not get the results that you need. So you've got to balance the needs of your experiment with the informed consent of the people participating. So you need to make sure when you're looking at doing experimentation or a study in psychology, you look at these questions, and then of course you would send it to the APA or the IRB, depending on what level you're at, to see if they agree. So then I asked my students to create a Bill of Rights for research experiments. So the people who participate, what should they know what kind of protections should they have? What kind of rights should they have? And I got some amazing answers here. You can see from my students. One person said all participants must be debriefed. Another said you have the right to refuse if you don't agree with what's happening. Another person mentioned you're guaranteed to back out of the research at any time. This person was saying consensual testing, meaning that you have the consent. You should have the information about it. You should know specifically what's going to happen. This person said if someone's harmed, there should be free medical care. And this person was saying that whatever the experimenter agrees to do and whatever they say they're going to do, that's all they should do. They shouldn't add other parts to the experiment because they don't have the person's agreement. This person said my safety, absolutely. You should have the right to safety. A summary of the experiment should be provided to the participant, understanding kind of what's going to happen. Yeah. What you agree to and only what you agree to will be possible to even happen. And then here we were talking about this one. Altering a person's mental state is not allowed. Well, sometimes when you do research, you need to alter a person's mental state. And sometimes you need to see the reactions. So we were clarifying that by saying that you can't alter their mental state without them understanding that that's a possibility of happening. So you have to be careful about how you manipulate the person. Like if you tell someone their family died just to see the reaction, but it's not true. I don't think there were any other. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. So there were some really great ideas here, and then we compared them to the actual participants' Bill of Rights here, the things that participants are guaranteed for. And the first one is informed consent. It's a chance to know all parts of the experiment and exactly what is expected of the person participating in the experiment. So again, we may not want to tell them every single part of the experiment, like then we're going to do this or we're going to do that, but we need to give them enough of an overview that they understand what they're getting into and what is expected of the person who's participating. Because, for example, if you're expected to go outside and dance around and, on the sidewalk and all the popular kids are going to be walking by, well, they might want to know that before they do it. The next part is that the experimenter will be held to a code of conduct. That code of conduct is specifically to protect the health and safety of the participants. Next, respecting the rights of privacy and dignity. Respecting rights, privacy, and dignity. Sorry, guys, it's after 4. My tongue has quit. Each participant has the right to be safe. They have the right to be private. They have the right to feel respected. That's what dignity gets into. So this is really important as an experimenter, that you make sure that you're considering that at all points in the experiment. And then the last part, after the experiment, having a chance to be debriefed. And there's that term again. To be debriefed, what it basically means is that you get a chance to talk about what happened in the experiment, and they make sure that you're okay afterwards. There's no lasting issues going on. So for example, what if you were in an experiment about taking medication? Shouldn't you have the right to know if you actually took the medication? That's really important to consider. The next part, were you deceived or emotionally manipulated? That's a really important thing to consider. If the person was deceived, then you might need to talk about it, make sure they don't need therapy. And then last but not least, did anything happen that was surprising or upsetting? Just being in an experiment, even if nothing bad happened, it's still good to kind of go through and talk about it and make sure you've processed all the parts. So my porg here says to respect all the people, and that is the goal of this Bill of Rights. All right, so now we were talking about this statement. I was just following orders. And my students recognized that this really was one of the things this is associated with is the Holocaust and World War II. After World War II, there were a lot of war trials, and people who had been Nazis, who or still were Nazis, who had been involved in the Holocaust or the capture or the harm of the Jewish people, a lot of them said, hey, I was just following orders. I didn't want to do this. I just felt like I had to. And the question became, how did regular, ordinary, average citizens who seemed like good people in the beginning become comfortable with killing or harming Jewish people, taking their things, treating them as less than human? And I was telling the students that actually I read a very interesting book. It was called Company Eich. And it was a book about actually just that. It followed a group of soldiers. The company was called Company Eich. It refers to how they say H in German. And you watch them go from good people who even got sick at the idea of hurting someone else, all the way down the line to becoming so desensitized that they didn't even think twice if they had to kill somebody or hurt somebody. And so that was sort of a question. You say, I'm just following orders, and it's easy to say, well, you shouldn't have followed the orders, you should have followed your conscience. But then the question becomes, well, okay, at what point do you forgive somebody for that? Because in a lot of cases, people were told either you kill or harm this person, or we will kill or harm you and your family. And that's really tough to stand up against. Plus, these are societies where authority is kind of seen as, like legal authority is kind of seen at the highest levels. You need to follow that. So we wanted to talk about how ethics have changed over time, how people might have different opinions now about what should be done versus 100 years ago, 200 years ago. So psychology began in the late 1800s, and we really have this expectation today of what is ethical and right, but that wasn't the case in the early years of psychology. Psychological experiments were done solely for the sake of knowledge, finding out what could be done, how it could be done, what it would do to people. But the thing is, some of these left the subjects injured and damaged, and in some cases of some really horrible experiments, damaged beyond repair. So the thing is, these experiments, the expectations and ideas we have today, they stem from some of these early experiments that really we would look at today and say, this is horrible, how could you do it? But at the time, that wasn't the feeling or belief. And we talked about the Milgram experiment in class on Wednesday. The Milgram experiment was about, they had these people come in and they told them they brought in this group of men and they said, okay, some of you will be our teachers and some of you will be our participants. And the teacher's job is to ask the students questions, the participants questions, and the participants or students, their job is to answer the questions. And if they're wrong, then the teachers will correct them. What they did not tell these men is that they were all going to be teachers, okay? And all the participants were actually actors who had been hired by the scientists to pretend that they were being students. And so what they told the teachers was, you need to sit here, and every time the student gives you the wrong answer, you have to use this dial and you give them a shock. And each time you shock them, you will increase the voltage so that the next shock is stronger. And the idea was that, if you get shocked this much, you'll learn the information and you'll faster and you'll stop getting hurt. But what they were really, really looking at is, would a person obey authority over their own conscience? And again, remember, this had happened in Germany under the Nazis. So there was this belief in the United States that nobody in the United States would do this. They wouldn't just follow orders. What they found in the experiment is that, in fact, the teachers, even though they were horrified and they're hearing the patients yell and scream and, oh, this hurts, oh, you're killing me, they still turned the shocks up. Even when they were told by the experimenter, you have to do it, please do it, they did. And you might be saying to yourself, why? Well, what this led to was kind of the flaw that people were more likely to follow authority than their own conscience. And so we see today, a lot of us will stand up and say, no, I wouldn't do that, that's wrong. Well, we see that today, but that kind of stemmed from the knowledge of what we got. Now the question is, was the Milgram experiment ethical? Remember, the teachers were administering shocks to the student. What the teachers did not know is that the quote-unquote students, the actors, they weren't actually receiving shocks. They were just pretending to and yelling and screaming for the effect of the teachers. But so what we have to think about here is that these people really weren't told what happened, and afterwards they really weren't told that they didn't administer real shocks. So they were pushed to do things, and a lot of my students questioned, did they know if they could walk out? Did they know that they, afterwards, did they know they weren't hurting the people? And there are people who participated in the experiment who said they never knew they weren't hurting anybody. They were not told that. So that the question is that ethical? And that's kind of a big question on the Milgram experiment. If you haven't watched it, I do have it on Canvas. I also have it on the recording and the PDF from yesterday, so you can pick it up that way. So we watched a short video about baby Albert, which was not the same as the video from Canvas. It was a little bit more in depth, but the video from Canvas gives you enough information. You're welcome to watch this one if you're interested. It's 6 minutes as opposed to 3, I think. And the question we discussed is whether or not you think the experiment was ethical to perform. And so I asked my students, why or why not why do you think that, or why not? So I'm looking for some of the answers my students give me here. Okay. All right, I'm sorry. So the question becoming, okay, sorry, I was looking for the answers there. So then what we were looking at is whether or not this experiment was ethical. And a lot of my students agreed after watching the video that this experiment was not in any way ethical, in that the child was not able to give informed consent, and the parents were not really told, or the mother was not really told what was going to happen, and they went beyond the scope of the experiment. So they said they were just going to condition the child. They didn't, according to the mom, she was never really told what Watson planned to do to her child. Watson just told her that he was gonna, he was gonna experiment and condition the child, but he said, I'm not gonna hurt your child. And so there was a lot to consider with this. After the experiment was over, Watson claims he attempted to decondition the child. The child, or the mother, says that he never offered. And Watson says that when he did offer, the mother said, no, you can't touch my child, which I don't necessarily know that I blame her if he lied to her in the first place. So if you don't know what this experiment is, I encourage you to go to Canvas or to watch this video. You can get it off of the PDF. But it's important to talk about because it leads us to our next activity, which is the discussion post that is due today. So in Canvas Module 2.11, D, the discussion post is what is ethical? And so what you need to do is to write a post stating whether you think this experiment should be performed today and why you think that. And so we're looking at ethical experimentation. And when you're considering whether or not this experiment should be performed today, you need to look at whether or not it was ethical. Now, I do want to go back and point out that some people said that the experiment was ethical because the chances were good that being so young, the child would forget the experiment entirely, and so there would not be long-lasting results. So you can say yes or no. It's totally up to you whether or not you think this is ethical. It's mostly about explaining to me why you made that decision. The second part of your assignment is to write a post, is to reply to your classmates' posts, and those will show up after you finish your post. So you choose one person to reply to, and you need to explain whether you agree or disagree with that person's statement and why you said that. If you disagree with someone, that's perfectly fine. Please just be respectful in your response. If you agree with them, awesome. But please don't write, I agree because it's good or something like that. Like, tell me what you agree with. Like, what is it they said that you really agreed with? What did you think on this? And I also offered 2 articles about the possible identity of baby Albert. One is called Little Albert Regains His Identity. This was the first study done to try to understand the identity of little Albert, because the truth was we have no idea who he is. We have 2 guesses, but we still don't know for sure. John Watson never said. This was done in 2010, but then in, I believe it's 2012, someone came along and did some more research and looked at another candidate that they felt better fit the descriptions that John Watson gave. And so that's what the second article is about. Now, I will warn you, it's kind of one of the children that they think could have been little Albert. It's kind of a sad story. The child does die young. So if that would be difficult for you, or you wouldn't be interested, I understand completely. You don't have to read these articles. But if you're interested in learning more, I do encourage you to look at them. They're not too time consuming, and they're very interesting. And that was where we ended class. Make sure that you're looking at what needs to be done by Monday. Hopefully these first 2 are long gone, but the pre-test and the Edpuzzle sign up, watching that how to use Edpuzzle video, then Edpuzzle psychological research, and last but not least, the 2.11D discussion, what is ethical? So if you have any questions, please let me know. And I look forward to seeing you guys next week. Thank you so much.